You know, it's kind of incredible if you think about it. In all of its almost 60-year history, not once to date has there ever been a musical episode of Star Trek. I'm not saying I'm hoping for one. With a few exceptions, musical is not a genre I'm really a fan of. I'm just saying there hasn't been one yet, and that's a little surprising given the fact that A, Star Trek has done a lot of genre hopping over the years, producing its own westerns, horror stories, comedies, romances, political dramas, heavy-handed anti-drug PSAs, and off-format backdoor pilots for shows that never happened, to name a few. And B, lots and lots of Star Trek characters we've met over the years have been musically inclined. Some have been singers, like Lieutenant Uhura, or the Doctor, or Captain Sisko. Come on, I know he doesn't sing very often, but just try and tell me it's not awesome when he belts out "The Best Is Yet to Come" at the end of Bada Bing, Bada Bang. Look at him go! Ella Moraine! But most musical Trek characters have been instrumentalists. Sometimes the instruments they play are real, and sometimes they're just as made up as subspace, or warp drive, or what's another imaginary concept from Star Trek? World peace. But whether they exist in the real world or only in the fictional universe of Star Trek, those musical instruments and what they tell us about the characters who play them can, collectively, be a fascinating subject. Will that translate into this being a fascinating video? I have no idea, but I do want to mention that I was commissioned to make this one by Pepper Coyote, so if it does turn out to be the shits, what I'm saying is, blame Pepper Coyote. It's not going to turn out like that, though. I'm determined to not let that happen. So determined, in fact, that I'm starting my examination of musical instruments in Star Trek with a look at the greatest musician in the entire franchise, the burly, bearded bone blower himself, William T. Riker. Can you see him back there? Did you hear what I said? I called you the greatest. Riker's instrument of choice is the trombone, and it's established as a distinctive part of his character early on in the run of Star Trek The Next Generation. He plays the trombone to impress Minuet, his holographic girlfriend, in the first season episode 11001001. He teaches it to his imaginary future son, who turns out to be a prisoner of the Romulans, who turns out to be a lonely alien in the fourth season episode Future Imperfect. In Conundrum, from Season 5, after everyone aboard the Enterprise temporarily loses their memories, discovering that he can play the trombone is part of Riker's process of figuring out who he is. In the seventh season episode, Thine Own Self, Troy drops by Riker's quarters while he's playing, and we get a charming little scene where he talks to her through the trombone, asking her what she thinks of the number he just finished, saying thank you after she says she liked it, and expressing annoyance at her smart-ass follow-up. Perhaps the most meaningful appearance of Riker's trombone comes in the sixth season episode, Second Chances, where Will Riker meets his own long-lost transporter duplicate. The duplicate, who eventually decides to go by the name Thomas, and Will don't get along for most of the episode, but ultimately they make peace, and before Tom leaves the Enterprise for a new Starfleet assignment, Will seals their bond by giving his trombone to Tom, telling him that really it belonged to both of them. The trombone is the perfect instrument for Riker. Like him, it's big and bold. Like him, it can be cheeky and comical or booming and commanding. Like him, it makes the most incredible noise when you slide your hand along its... Riker isn't the only musician on the Enterprise D. Many members of the crew play instruments and even give concerts, but most of those are nobody background characters who don't even have names, or guest stars, or recurring characters who randomly have a cello shoved in front of them for one episode, like Chief O'Brien. Although, it should be noted, O'Brien being able to play the cello was referenced later in an episode of Deep Space Nine, so climb off my back, nerds. Among the TNG regulars, the other prominent musician besides Riker is Data. We see him playing multiple instruments throughout the series, including the oboe and the guitar, but he's most frequently seen playing the violin, both during public recitals and privately in his quarters. As with Riker and the trombone, Data's interest in the violin doesn't feel like the writers randomly assigned him a musical instrument. It feels right. It makes sense that Data plays the violin. It's a point he shares in common with one of his favorite fictional characters, Sherlock Holmes, who he occasionally plays in holodeck programs. We see Data as Holmes playing the violin in the second season episode, Elementary, Dear Data. Data's approach to playing the violin offers us some insight into his character. At the end of the third season episode, The Ensigns of Command, after returning from a demanding solo mission, Data meets with Picard in the captain's ready room. Picard is listening to a recording of one of Data's violin performances and compliments Data, saying that his playing shows feeling and is beautiful. Strictly speaking, Data explains, it's not his playing. His style is an imitation of two other violinists, Jascha Heifetz and Trenke Bronken. But Picard doesn't let him get away with that. He points out that while Data may be imitating other players, he chose which players to imitate, and he synthesized their distinctive styles into something new that was entirely his own. It is, Data realizes, his way of being creative. And here's the thing, it's our way of being creative too, especially when we're just learning a particular craft. Until we figure out what our way of doing it is, we study and imitate the ways of our teachers or our role models. Whether it's writing, painting, music, dancing, acting, we start by modeling ourselves on others who are better at it than we are, and as we get better and gain confidence, we make their way into our way. We incorporate multiple influences, we try things out for ourselves, and we blend it all together to make a style, a technique, an approach that belongs to us. Data thinks the way he plays the violin makes him something other than human when it actually makes him more human, which is a recurring character arc for Data, you may have noticed. And hey, Data isn't the only example of a Star Trek character whose musical instrument is used as a form of character development. Let's not forget our long-suffering forever ensign, Voyager's Harry Kim. First, he plays the clarinet, and then, at some point, for some reason, he switches to the saxophone. That's a change? Character change? Growth? Like, if Captain Picard switched his tea from Earl Grey to Darjeeling suddenly and without explanation, you'd naturally assume he had undergone some sort of meaningful evolution off-screen, and not that it was just half-assed writing on a show where nothing really meant anything, right? What other Star Trek characters do we see playing non-fictional musical instruments? There's Trip on Enterprise. He plays the harmonica. That tracks. A simple, humble, down-home instrument for a simple, humble, down-home kind of guy. And I do love a harmonica. Did you know a harmonica was one of the first musical instruments played in outer space? Astronaut Wally Schirra, one of the original Mercury 7, who eventually flew in all three of NASA's human spaceflight programs during the 1960s, played one while in orbit during Gemini 6A, in December 1965. It was 10 days until Christmas, and Schirra reported to Mission Control that he saw an unidentified object in low orbit, traveling from north to south. Then, accompanied by his fellow astronaut Tom Stafford on sleigh bells, Schirra began to play Jingle Bells on his harmonica. Classic astronaut shit. Fitting then that Trip, a crew member on the first Starship Enterprise, would play the harmonica, the instrument of choice of one of America's first real space explorers. Can't forget Scotty. He plays the bagpipes. We see Scotty's quarters only once in Star Trek the original series, in the episode By Any Other Name. That's the one where the people from the Andromeda Galaxy show up and take over the Enterprise by transforming most of the crew into little blocks of styrofoam. Scotty, one of the senior officers left to help run the ship, does his part to defeat the hijackers by inviting one of them to his cabin to get drunk. Remember, they drink their way through most of Scotty's booze, so he digs out another bottle of something, and the other guy is like, "What is it?" And Scotty's like, "It's green." Anyway, among the decorations visible in Scotty's quarters is a set of bagpipes. Now, that doesn't mean Scotty plays the bagpipes necessarily. They may just be an ornament to dress up the place. It could be Scotty just likes the way that set of bagpipes looks on display, but doesn't understand how it works or know what to do with it. Like when a Republican has a copy of the Constitution in his office. But we do know that Scotty can actually play the bagpipes because we see him playing them on screen one time in Star Trek II at Spock's funeral. There's Scotty standing off to the side behind Kirk, playing a heart-piercing rendition of Amazing Grace, actually played on the film's soundtrack by Kathleen Nicholson Graham. I know not everybody digs the bagpipes, but I have always loved them, and I think Scotty's playing Amazing Grace in memory of his fallen comrade and friend is a beautiful addition to that scene. Unlike Riker's trombone or Data's violin, it does kind of seem like Scotty was assigned the bagpipes for superficial reasons. It doesn't tell us anything about him that we didn't already know. Oh, hey, he's Scottish, how about that? But I'm okay with it, because the one time we do see him playing the pipes, he makes it count. We see several regular characters from throughout the franchise who apparently know how to play the piano. Ben Sisko, the Doctor, Stamets, who accompanies Adira, who plays the cello in a lovely little scene from The Sanctuary in Season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. But I think that's about it for series regulars playing real-life musical instruments. Obviously, there are many more examples of guest stars or background characters playing instruments here and there, but I'd rather focus on examples that are memorable or meaningful to the story or the characters, and I think I've pretty much got that covered. So, let's move on to the imaginary instruments, the musical instruments that exist only in the fantastical, far-out fantasy world of Star Trek. Musical instruments so exotic, so bizarre, so out of this world, they could only be found in the realm of science fiction. Instruments like the the Vulcan lute. I know it's not an auto harp. An auto harp has a resonating chamber and doesn't have a neck. I'm just saying, give June Carter a few minutes with it, and I'm pretty sure she could figure it out. Not now, obviously. She's been dead since 2003, but go back in time 20 years, hand June Carter a Vulcan lute, and I'm pretty sure... No, 20 years ago was close to the end. She was ill, about to need heart surgery, plus Johnny was also in poor health. No way she could have learned a new instrument. Better make it 30. Go back in time 30 years, hand June Carter a Vulcan lute. I guarantee you, in 10 minutes, she's strumming Wildwood Flower on it like she invented the thing. It's not that exotic of an instrument, is what I'm saying. And that's not a knock. The fact that the Vulcan lute looks like a real musical instrument is what makes it plausible. When we see characters playing it, it looks like they could conceivably be playing music with it, which makes sense, given that it's a Vulcan instrument, and why would a Vulcan attempt to play a musical instrument that is incapable of producing music? That would be illogical. The character we see playing the Vulcan lute most often is Spock. It's one of the earliest things we learn about Spock. As a matter of fact, he first plays the lute in Charlie X, the second episode of Star Trek ever broadcast. He accompanies Uhura as she sings to the crew in the recreation room. And by the way, Nichelle Nichols' voice may be the greatest musical instrument in all of Star Trek. Just saying. We see Spock playing his lute several times throughout the run of Star Trek the Original Series. Usually he's in the company of others when he's doing it, but he also plays it privately in his quarters For example, he's playing it while trying to keep his shit together in the grip of Pon farr in my favorite classic Trek episode, Amok Time. Seems to be working, too, until Uhura calls and interrupts him. Just text him, Uhura. Who calls? Spock also plays his lute around the campfire with Kirk and McCoy at the end of Star Trek V. As with Riker and the trombone and Data and the violin, the fact that Spock plays the Vulcan lute tells us something important about him. He plays it a lot. It seems to be one of his most practiced hobbies. That shows us that even though Spock is unemotional and logical, he's more than a walking computer. He has an inner life. He values music and art, and so, by extension, do other Vulcans. The arts and what we call the humanities, although Spock might raise an eyebrow at that term, are not incompatible with reason and logic. They strengthen the fabric of our lives. They make our existence richer and more fulfilling. There are some thoughts and feelings that can't be expressed in words or mathematical equations. They need to be sung or played, seen, heard, interpreted, felt, intuited. We all need to express ourselves like that sometimes, or to experience such expressions by others. Spock needs that too. On Star Trek Voyager, Tuvok also plays the Vulcan lute. We never actually see him playing it, but in Persistence of Vision from Season 2, he has a hallucination of his wife, who reminds him that he used to play the lute for her. In the episode Innocence, from later in Season 2, Tuvok tells a group of children that he would often play the lute and sing to his own children, particularly his youngest son. Again, this tells us something about Tuvok. It broadens and deepens his character. Even though we don't actually see him playing the lute, knowing that he plays it for his kids reminds us that he is a parent and gives us some insight into the kind of parent he is. He doesn't have his lute with him during Innocence, but he does sing a bit of one of the songs he plays for his son, and it's tender and lyrical, a lullaby sung from a parent to a child with love. We don't typically see that side of Tuvok, but now we know it exists. Another fictional instrument that plays an important role in the life of a Star Trek regular is this Triill version of the piano. In the third season Deep Space Nine episode Equilibrium, Jadzia Dax discovers a talent for playing this instrument that she never knew she had. That leads her to an even more significant discovery. Her Triill symbiont had a past host that Jadzia doesn't remember. The forgotten host is Duran, a musician and composer and murderer who was the host of the Dax symbiont before Curzon, Jadzia's immediate predecessor. Duran's status as a joined Triill was erased from the records, and any memory of him carried by the Dax symbiont was blocked because even though he was judged to be a poor candidate for joining, and the Triill doctors expected him to reject the symbiont within a few days, he remained joined for 6 months, a fact which threatened the entire system the Triill government had put in place to allocate the limited number of available symbionts. It's Triill inside baseball, it's complicated. The point is, Jadzia not only discovers something about one of her own past lives that had been hidden from her, she also uncovers a secret that threatens the very foundations of her society, and all because she got an earworm and just couldn't get rid of it. You might think I'm joking, but I'm serious. You youngsters won't remember, but back in the 90s, our entire civilization almost crumbled because of the cranberries. Honestly, it would have been worth it. Zombie is a great fucking song. Anyway, it was a near thing. That episode ends with Jadzia, her memories of Duran now restored, sitting down at the piano and beginning to play, implying that from this point on, the instrument will be a part of her life. Learning to play music and finding a side of yourself you never knew was there. I've never had that experience. I don't play any instruments, but I'm told that's a thing. And that it's pretty cool. There's one more fictional musical instrument I want to talk about. It's definitely the most significant musical instrument in the entire franchise because it not only features prominently in one of the most celebrated episodes, it also changes the character who plays it in a profound and lasting way. The character is Jean-Luc Picard, the instrument is called the Ressikan, and the episode, from Season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation, is The Inner Light. Standing on the bridge of the Enterprise, Picard is zapped unconscious by a mysterious alien probe. When he wakes up, he has inexplicably been transported to the planet Catan, where his name is Cayman. He's a respected member of the small village of Ressick, and he's married to a woman named Eileen. He still remembers his life as Picard, but no one else has ever heard of Starfleet or encountered aliens or anything like that. Catan is a pre-warp civilization that apparently hasn't done much in the way of space exploration. Eventually, Picard gets used to the fact that he's Cayman now and settles into life in Ressick. He forms close friendships, has children, conducts scientific research in a number of fields, and learns to play the humble tin flute that is native to his community. The Ressikan becomes a central part of Cayman's life. He dedicates himself to mastering it, and eventually he does. He begins by playing a song he remembers from his life as Picard, Frere Jacques, then moves on to another tune, a folk melody from his village, a tune that becomes the theme of the episode and, in some ways, Picard's theme from that point on. He plays that tune on the Ressikan for his friends who gather at the naming ceremony of his and Eileen's son, Batai. Later, when Batai is grown, he tells Cayman that he doesn't want to continue his education, he wants to focus on music, specifically playing the Ressikan, which he learned from his father. Music has shaped not only Cayman's own life, but that of his family as well. Eventually, Cayman lives out the rest of his life, decades and decades there in Ressick. His wife dies, his children grow and have children of their own, and through it all, he watches and worries and tries in vain to help as worsening environmental problems slowly render the planet uninhabitable. In the end, he's sitting with his family, outdoors in the unforgiving sun, watching a rocket launch. Only then does he learn the reason he was brought here and the true significance of everything he has experienced. Eileen, his wife, and his old friend Batai, after whom his son was named, both of whom have been dead for many years by this point, appear and explain that the rocket being launched carries a probe. The same probe which Picard encountered at the start of the episode. The probe which brought him to Catan. The rest of us have been gone for 1,000 years, Eileen tells him. If you remember what we were and how we lived, then we'll have found life again. As the rocket carrying the probe continues its climb into the sky, Picard suddenly awakens back on the bridge of the Enterprise. To his shock and confusion, Riker tells him that he's only been unconscious for about 25 minutes. After a checkup from Dr. Crusher to make sure he's okay, Picard returns to his quarters, which now seem just as unfamiliar to him as his home on Catan did at the beginning of his vision. He receives a visit from Riker, who comes bearing a gift. The probe was brought aboard the Enterprise and opened. Inside was a box. Riker hands Picard the box and exits. Inside the box, Cayman's Ressikan. Picard takes it in both hands, clutching it to his chest. He paces around the room, stops, raises the flute to his lips, and plays. Plays that song, the song he played at his son's naming ceremony, the song that represents his life with Eileen and their children on Catan. Star Trek The Next Generation was a great show, but it isn't usually noted for its dynamic characters. The regulars of TNG are all strong, well-defined, engaging characters, or at least after the first couple of seasons they are, but they don't really seem to be changed all that much by their experiences during the run of the series. There are exceptions to this, and Picard following the Inner Light is one of them. We see Picard playing the Ressikan in his quarters during his off-duty hours in the Season 6 episode, A Fistful of Datas, which is a nice reminder that the events of the Inner Light happened and meant something. Then, later in Season 6, in the episode Lessons, Picard strikes up a romance with Lieutenant Commander Nella Darren, the Enterprise's new head of stellar cartography, and we learn just how important to him playing the Ressikan has become. Darren is a musician herself, a piano player, and she and Picard bond over their shared love of music. They begin playing duets together. Eventually, Picard plays that song for her. She remarks on how beautiful it is and how Picard plays it with such feeling. Picard doesn't explain then, but later in his quarters, he tells Darren the story of where his Ressikan came from and how he learned that song. In the space of 25 minutes, I lived a lifetime on that planet, Picard says. I had a wife and children and a grandchild, and it was absolutely real to me. When I awoke, all that I had left of that life there was the flute that I had taught myself to play. He tells her that he's sharing this with her because I want you to understand what my music means to me and what it means for me to be able to share it with someone. They say that learning to play music changes your relationship to music. As I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't know about that. I don't play any instruments and have no musical aptitude to speak of, as anyone who has ever heard me sing can attest. Who's up for another round of My Blue Heaven, eh? Anybody? Even so, I think I know what people mean when they say that. Becoming a writer changed me as a reader, and my experience making low-budget independent films, modest and limited though it was, definitely changed the way I see and think about movies. When you create something, you come to understand it on a level that you just can't reach any other way. Learning to play the Ressikan doesn't just change Picard's relationship to music, it changes his relationship with himself. We know he loves music long before The Inner Light, but after that, he's not just someone who listens to music, he's someone who creates it. There's something that exists from then on that didn't before. His music. And that music doesn't come into being because Picard randomly decided to learn an instrument for a New Year's resolution. Not that there would be anything wrong with that. That music, his music, is rooted in a unique, deeply personal, transformative experience. Every time Picard plays his Ressikan, he is reaching out across space and time to touch a world and a life that is no longer there. That's what's so wondrous about music, though, isn't it? That sort of thing doesn't just happen to characters in sci-fi shows. It happens to all of us. A song comes on that you first heard when you were in high school, and all of a sudden you're right back there and feeling what you felt then, no matter how long it's been. I suppose, in that sense, we all have our music. Whether we're musicians or just listeners, music binds us together, connecting us to each other, to people and places that are otherwise lost to us, and to every place and every version of ourselves we've ever been. It's a kind of magic. You know, if they ever do that musical episode and they decide to make it a jukebox musical, It's a Kind of Magic would be a great number for that. But whose number? What Star Trek character could possibly have the talent, the charisma, the unstoppable rhythm necessary to step into the shoes of the legendary Freddie Mercury? He dances, he sings, he plays. He's a triple threat! Congratulations, kid, you got the part! I always knew he had rock star potential. I grokked that about him from day one. Well, that about wraps it up, folks. I know I didn't touch on every single musical instrument, real or imaginary, that we've seen in Star Trek. That wasn't my intention with this video. I tried to focus on the musical instruments that were memorable or meaningful relative to main characters. So if there's a musical instrument seen in a Star Trek show or movie that's a favorite of yours for whatever reason, and I neglected to mention it, please share it with us in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, assuming you can afford it, of course, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. I want to thank Pepper Coyote for commissioning this video. I hope it was worth the wait. And as always, I want to thank all of you for watching. Until next time, take care, everybody.